Welcome, everyone, to today's deep dive. I am incredibly excited to have you with us today.
Yeah, we have a really fascinating one lined up. I'm excited too.
We absolutely do. Our mission today is a major one. We're unpacking a genuinely fascinating, completely myth-busting perspective on the corporate world. We're drawing from Jonathan Macey's brilliant work, Corporate Governance Promises, Kept Promises Broken.
It's a book that really forces you to look directly at the underlying systems you rely on to protect your investments.
Right. But before we get into the actual mechanics, let's talk about a governance paradox that really sets the stage.
The Enron paradox.
Exactly. We all know how the Enron saga ended back in 2001. But what often gets forgotten is that right up until the collapse, Enron was widely praised for having what was considered the absolute best board of directors in America.
People literally called it the gold standard of boards.
Right. I mean, we're talking about a room filled with Stanford Business School deans and former Olympians and political heavyweights. A true corporate dream team.
Which is what makes the failure so much more baffling.
Yes. Within just a single year, that exact room full of geniuses oversaw one of the greatest, most catastrophic corporate collapses in human history. How does a room full of the smartest, most qualified people completely fail so spectacularly?
Well, that anomaly is the perfect entry point. To understand how a board like that fails, we have to recognize that corporate governance isn't just about SEC filings or financial modeling.
So it's not just the math.
Not at all. It is fundamentally about human psychology, the invisible social norms that govern our behavior, and the very basic concept of a promise. The core argument we are going to explore today challenges the very system we rely on to protect your investments.
A board of directors.
Exactly. The concept of the completely independent board of directors is in many ways structurally, psychologically, and socially wired to fail you.
So if corporate law is supposedly protecting us, what actually is a corporation to begin with? It helps to strip away the legal jargon.
It really was. Because a corporation isn't a single living entity or a building. In legal terms, it is just a complex web or a nexus of contract.
A nexus of contract.
Right. And for you, the equity investor, the person putting your hard-earned money into the stock market, your specific contract with the corporation is shockingly thin.
It essentially boils down to a vague promise.
Exactly. A promise from the managers that they won't steal your money and that they will try their best to maximize your wealth. That's really it.
And if we look globally, that simple promise gets interpreted in wildly different ways depending on your geographic and cultural location.
There is some incredible survey data that illustrates this cultural whiplash perfectly.
The survey data was mind-blowing to me.
Right. So if you ask senior corporate managers in the United States and the United Kingdom who owns the company, over 70% will tell you that the company belongs exclusively to the shareholders.
Which makes total sense to an American investor.
Sure. And if you ask about priorities, a whopping 89% of those US and UK managers say that paying dividends to shareholders is far more important than providing job security for their workers.
That is the water we swim in. It
Yeah.
feels completely standard.
But the data from elsewhere flips that entire worldview on its head.
Let's look at Japan. The contrast there is just astonishing.
It really is. In Japan, an astonishing 97.1% of senior corporate managers believe the company belongs to all stakeholders.
Not just the shareholders.
Right. They mean workers, customers, suppliers, and the local community.
And when it comes to dividends versus jobs,
Only a tiny fraction, just 3%, prioritize dividends over employee job security. 3%.
there's a total inversion of the US and UK mindset.
Completely. And we see very similar sentiments strongly echoed in Germany and France, where roughly 80% of managers view the corporation as belonging to a broad community of stakeholders, not just the people holding the stock.
For you, the investors, this reveals something profound about how the system works.
Yeah.
Corporate law is actually surprisingly skeletal.
It's just a bare framework.
Right. The real heavy lifting, the thing that actually dictates how your money is handled and prioritized, is determined by social norms and cultural expectations.
The U.S. has a distinct shareholder primacy norm, but it is just that, a norm. It's not an inescapable law of physics.
And because the law is so skeletal, we rely incredibly heavily on the board of directors to enforce that norm and keep an eye on the managers.
But doing so creates a massive inherent contradiction at the very heart of the corporate boardroom.
The Madisonian conflict, I find this part so fascinating.
It is. We are asking directors to do two completely impossible things at the exact same time.
Right. They are expected to be wise counselors who sit down with management to give strategic advice.
But then they are simultaneously expected to be strict objective disciplinarians who monitor and evaluate that same management's
You
performance.
cannot objectively grade your own homework. It is a dual-role dilemma.
Once a director helps formulate a strategy or enthusiastically agrees to hire a specific CEO, they take on what is essentially virtual ownership of that decision.
And that triggers a psychological phenomenon known as escalating commitments.
Right. Think of it like staying in a terrible movie just because you already paid for the ticket. Once you have publicly defended a strategy, your brain is wired to ignore new information that suggests the strategy is failing.
You become anchored to your own past choices.
Exactly. When a director has spent months advising a CEO on a massive merger, they lose the capacity to step back a year later and objectively fire that CEO when the merger goes south. They are suffering from the inside view.
Warren Buffett actually offered a brilliant analogy to explain the intense social pressure at play here.
I love this analogy.
It's so good. He pointed out that in a boardroom populated by well-mannered, polite elite people, raising your hand to challenge a CEO's massive mega grant of stock options is like belching at the dinner table.
It's just not done. You don't embarrass your host.
The human desire to conform, to avoid causing embarrassment, and to maintain a pleasant collegial atmosphere creates a phenomenon known as board capture.
The directors aren't necessarily corrupt. They aren't taking bribes under the table.
They are simply captured by the social dynamics and by the very managers they are supposed to be overseeing.
And we see this play out in some truly spectacular historical failures.
Right, these aren't just theoretical boardroom dynamics. These are case studies in board capture that destroyed real shareholder value. Take the wild story of TransUnion and the famous Smith versus Van Gorkum legal case.
Oh, this is a classic.
The CEO, Jerome Van Gorkum, basically arranged to sell the entire company to the Pritzker Group for $55 a share. And he hashed this out over a single weekend.
Just a weekend.
Right. He then goes to his board, which included 4 other CEOs and a business school dean, and gives them a 20-minute presentation.
And the board approves the sale of the entire corporation in 2 hours.
2 hours. Without even bothering to read the contract.
Exactly. And the Delaware Supreme Court famously punished those directors, blaming a lack of process.
But focusing merely on process misses the real disease.
They totally missed it. The problem wasn't just that they didn't have enough meetings or failed to generate enough paperwork. The problem was that the board was thoroughly captured.
They blindly trusted the CEO because they shared a boardroom culture that demanded absolute deference to executive leadership.
They assumed that because he was the CEO, he knew best. To demand to read the contract line by line would have been a massive violation of that collegial trust.
We see that blind trust in TransUnion, but what happens when that trust is fueled by actual friendship? Let's look at the Disney board during the Michael Eisner era.
The Magic Kingdom mess.
Yes. Eisner decides he wants to unilaterally hire his best friend Michael Ovitz as the president of Disney.
And the board's compensation committee gets together and approves an unprecedented, incredibly lucrative employment contract in exactly 1 hour.
1 hour. And the director leading that compensation committee was actually being paid extra to negotiate the deal.
Right. And Ovitz lasts just 14 months before the relationship falls apart.
And he walks away with a staggering $140 million in cash and stock options for slightly over a year of work.
The legal fallout from the Disney mess is incredibly revealing about how the law views capture. The trial court's language was scathing.
They were not holding back.
No, they explicitly called the Disney board sycophantic and referred to CEO Michael Eisner as an omnipotent monarch of his own magic kingdom.
Wow.
Yet, despite recognizing that the boardroom culture was fundamentally unwholesome and entirely captured by Eisner's personality, the law still protected the directors.
Because they weren't technically financially self-interested in the payout.
Exactly. The legal system doesn't penalize directors just for being sycophants so long as they don't personally pocket the money.
It is unbelievable that the law protects that kind of negligence, just because the directors didn't get a kickback. But it gets even darker when we look at equity funding. This wasn't just sycophantic behavior.
Oh, this was jaw-dropping, outright fraud.
Management at this insurance company fabricated 64,000 fake insurance policies.
64,000.
They actually held late-night forgery parties in the office.
Complete with employees faking doctor's notes and inventing blood pressure readings just to fool their auditors.
And when the fraud finally started coming to light, the SEC stepped in.
The regulators explicitly threatened to shut the entire company down into receivership unless the independent directors fired the corrupt executives immediately.
And what did the independent directors do?
A majority of them stayed fiercely loyal to the corrupt CEO. They actively resisted firing him because he was the one who had originally recruited them to the board.
That is the ultimate, undeniable proof of board capture. The social bond, that feeling of owing the CEO for their prestigious high-status board seat, overpowered even the direct threat of federal regulators shutting down a massive, publicly traded company.
Which brings us right back to our opening hook, Enron's willful blindness.
Right, how did that dream team of absolute elites fail so miserably?
They failed because they were entirely captured by management's total control of information and by their own deep-seated collegiality.
The Enron board repeatedly voted to waive the company's own strict code of conduct.
They just completely ignored it.
Exactly. They did this so their chief financial officer, Andrew Fastow, could run special purpose entities on the side.
These were essentially off-balance sheet shell companies used to hide Enron's massive debt, but Fastow was personally managing them and profiting from them.
The board trusted management so completely that a full year after, a director explicitly asked for details about how much money Fastow was making from these side deals and was ignored.
They only finally found out Fastow had pocketed $7 million when they read about it in the Wall Street Journal.
They were supposed to be the ultimate monitors, and they had to read the newspaper to find out what their own CFO was doing.
It's incredible.
It raises an incredibly important question for anyone with money in the market. If financial independence doesn't work, if making sure directors aren't technically employees or receiving direct kickbacks isn't enough to make them good monitors, what actually does?
We have to understand the profound difference between financial ties and social ties. You can see this perfectly illustrated in the Oracle lawsuit.
Right, the derivative lawsuit.
Yes, which is basically when shareholders sue on behalf of the corporation because the board refuses to take action against its own executives. In this case, they were alleging insider trading by CEO Larry Ellison and other board members.
And to handle the investigation, Oracle formed a special litigation committee.
And appointed two highly respected Stanford professors. On paper, this was textbook financial independence.
Neither professor was an employee of Oracle.
And neither had a financial stake in the outcome.
But you cannot audit human nature. Ellison was a massive potential donor to Stanford, and one of the other investigated directors was a fellow Stanford professor.
The judge in that case recognized a profound truth. Human motives like friendship, collegiality, institutional loyalty, and the intense desire to maintain one's social standing are just as blinding as raw financial greed.
It is incredibly difficult for two Stanford professors to objectively investigate a major Stanford donor and a fellow Stanford colleague.
Financial independence is easy to measure on a spreadsheet. You just look at the payroll. But you can't audit the fear of being ostracized at the next faculty dinner.
The social web is often much stronger than the financial one.
Exactly.
This leads to a massive counterintuitive regulatory paradox. We have established that these independent, highly collegial boards are essentially structurally useless as monitors.
They are completely captured by social dynamics, escalating commitments, and the desire to be polite.
So what do our politicians and regulators do with this information?
They do the exact opposite of what logic would dictate. Politicians and regulators consistently subsidize and heavily encourage the absolute least effective governance tools.
They constantly demand more independent directors, more specialized board committees, more reliance on credit rating agencies, and more SEC oversight.
They mandate this broken system because it is the path of least political resistance.
Corporate managers don't mind having a few more friendly captured directors on their board.
It doesn't threaten their jobs, and it provides a great illusion of oversight for the public.
But the tools that actually do protect your money, the mechanisms with real teeth regulators, actively strangle them.
Because the most effective tools for keeping managers honest are objective external market forces.
Like the market for corporate control.
Yes, which usually takes the form of hostile takeovers. Or look at the intense scrutiny that comes with an initial public offering and IPO.
These mechanisms are adversarial.
They are completely objective. When an investment bank underwrites an IPO, they put their own massive capital and their institutional reputation on the line.
If the prospectus is fraudulent, the bank gets sued.
Because they have real skin in the game, They send in armies of lawyers and forensic accountants to tear the company apart.
They act as infinitely better monitors than a board of directors that meets 4 times a year and eats catered sandwiches.
But because these tools, like hostile takeovers and intense underwriter scrutiny, genuinely threaten incumbent management corporate lobbying, goes into overdrive against them.
Managers lobby heavily to protect their fiefdoms.
And regulators respond by heavily regulating, complicating, and crippling these highly effective market-based tools.
The system actively encourages the fluffy captured boards and legally blocks the sharp, effective market forces that don't care about dinner party etiquette.
That is exactly what happens.
That is a tough pill to swallow if you are trusting the system with your retirement account. But there is a fascinating antidote to all of this collegiality.
Yes, there is a specific type of director who actually breaks the mold and gets results.
The dissident director.
We're talking about someone who gets forced onto the board from the outside entirely against management's wishes.
A perfect example of this is the activist investor Carl Icahn. Time Warner had just gone through the disastrous AOL merger, and the stock was absolutely tanking.
And Icahn swoops in, buys a $2 billion stake in the company, and threatens to run his own slate of dissident directors to forcibly take over board seats.
A dissident director is the glaring exception to the rule of board capture because they operate under an entirely different set of social norms.
A dissident director is not recruited by the CEO. They don't owe the CEO their seat.
They are not there to make friends. They are not hoping for an invitation to the country club, and they certainly are not there to be collegial.
Their explicit stated mandate from the shareholders who voted them in is to be adversarial.
They are put there specifically to belch at the dinner table.
Exactly. And what's amazing is how much power just the mere threat of that friction holds.
Time Warner management was so completely terrified of having Icahn's adversarial directors inside their comfortable boardroom that they immediately caved to his demands.
They agreed to a massive $20 billion stock repurchase and major cost-cutting initiatives just to keep Icahn's people out.
And the result was the stock value went up for everyone. The friction worked.
It proves that the mere presence of a genuinely independent adversarial force forces management to actually prioritize shareholder value over their own comfort.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the big takeaway for you, the listener, is this. True protection for your investments doesn't come from a glossy corporate brochure highlighting a board filled with independent elites who play nice and have flawless resumes.
It comes from friction. It comes from distance from objective market forces and from adversarial actors who are completely unafraid to upset the status quo.
The next time you hear a company loudly touting its highly collegial, perfectly compliant, perfectly harmonious board of directors, you shouldn't feel reassured.
You should actually wonder who's really pulling the strings. A room without friction is a room without oversight.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own. There's a really interesting comparison to be drawn between corporate boards of directors and government legislatures.
Like Congress or Parliament?
Exactly. Legislatures only really function as a check on executive power because they're divided into opposing political parties that are constantly scrutinizing, challenging, and arguing with each other.
The friction is built directly into the design of the institution.
If the social norm of collegiality is the deadly disease that causes corporate boards to fail and destroys billions in shareholder wealth, what if the ultimate solution isn't demanding more independence, but mandating division?
What if we legally required corporate boards to be split into two adversarial political parties that are structurally designed to oppose each other?
Think about it. Would you feel safer investing your money in a company that is constantly arguing with itself? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the consensus, and we will catch you next time.